If you want to fall asleep to a secret, let it be one that hums like a distant lullaby, a low, living note that settles under your ribs and keeps your breath even. Close your eyes and imagine the desert at night, a wide, cool bowl of air. The stars like small coin lights burned into velvet. There's the faint, polite smell of sage and dust. Radio static threads through everything, the hush between songs. The soft crackle of distant voices, and in that hush the world feels willing to keep a secret. It was the sort of night that holds its breath. Roswell had a way of doing that when the sun dropped and the town folded its day's noise inward. The base lights dimmed to a sodium glow. Dogs stopped barking. Even the highway seemed to pause as if listening. On the edge of the base, where the scrub softened to open plain, the sky was a clear, glass bowl. Everyone who'd ever loved the night knew the pattern of it, a rhythm you could sleep inside of. Maggie Ortega knew it better than most. She worked the late shift at the Radio Shack, keeping records, answering calls with the measured calm of someone who learned to speak to the static. Maggie loved the static. It was honest noise, white, indifferent, full of small things you could try to hear if you wanted. At 2 a.m, she was half awake, leaning back in the battered chair with her scarf around her shoulders, listening to a station that always played classical pieces so soft they sounded like dreams. She had a thermos of coffee gone lukewarm and a pocket notebook with ink-stained margins, where she wrote down sky maps and the names of stars she'd made up. It was the kind of life that took you into the night and left you there. Then the stars moved wrong. It was not a shooting star. Maggie knew shooting stars. This was slow and deliberate, a seam in the sky that opened and bled silver. The air shivered like someone whispering your name. For a moment, a long, thin moment, there was a soundless physical presence, like the desert inhaling. Then something went down, a comet of white that did not burn, a light that folded itself into the ground with the softness of paper landing on water. Under different circumstances, she would have stayed at the radio desk and logged the coordinates. The logbook demanded it. Habit is a very strong thing, but part of Maggie's heart had been written by other hands, a child who watched meteors on tin roofs, a woman who pressed her ear against the hull of an old car to hear the engine breathe. She left her chair and stepped into the night. The drive out to the edge of the base was a slow, quiet thing. Her tires whispered over gravel. At first the world looked unbroken, the road, the scrub, the rim of distant hills, as if someone had not just broken the sky. Then she saw the lights, a scattering of angular beams crawling over the plain. Men moving like ants with flashlights and a larger, colder light sweeping from a vehicle that smelled faintly of oil and authority. They were already there when she arrived, a spill of white and khaki and the low, efficient voice of men who move with orders sewn into the seams of their uniforms. The wreckage, when she found it, did not look like wreckage from any storybook. There were no twisted wings or smoking engines. Instead, the place looked ceremonially rearranged, fragments of something thin and metallic, like the skins of silver leaves scattered across the scrub, a lattice of material that bent at impossible angles and then refused to creak. Some pieces were glass without reflection, some were like woven light. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sweetly metallic, the way coins smell when you set them on your tongue. Maggie crouched and lifted a shard. It was lighter than any metal she'd handled and warm, as if it had kept hold of sunlight. When she ran her thumb across it, the surface blurred, colors shifting like oil on rainwater. Blues folding into greens, an impossible color that suggested movement even when still. The shard hummed under her palm, so soft she would have sworn it was the earth itself responding to touch. A voice spoke from behind her, close and serious. "You shouldn't be here." Maggie turned. The man who stepped into the light was not young. His uniform had the clean, careful crease of someone who'd been taught to make everything look orderly. He smelled of coffee and tobacco and the weariness of men who'd seen things they were supposed to forget. He held a clipboard the way other men held rosaries. When he reached to take the shard from her, the air seemed to tighten. "Where did you find that?" he asked, but it was not a question for the logbook. It carried the weight of a command released under harsh sleep. Maggie could have handed it to him. Protocol said she should. Instead, she folded a corner of the shard between thumb and forefinger and tucked it into the inside pocket of her jacket, as if hiding a small bird. The man saw the movement. His eyes did not soften. Secrets are not negotiated with soft eyes. You want to leave, he said. The way one gives directions to a child crossing a busy street. For your own good. Behind him, someone else whispered into a handset, words clipped with urgency. The base lights flared. Trucks rolled in with the industrious noise of consequence. A net of men moved across the clearing, lifting, bagging, photographing. They worked with the brisk efficiency of people altering a scene, before the world had a chance to ask questions. Maggie felt like a witness at a play where the actors had suddenly decided the script had changed. They called it many things later. Weather balloon, crashed weather device, debris from a test. The words came wrapped in official paper, in polite smiles, and folding answers into press releases, until the story fit neatly into people's days like a comfortable coat. But she knew the language of the thing in her pocket. It had a grammar she could not translate. That night, as they loaded pieces into crates and draped tarps over corners of the plane, she stayed standing in the line of light, listening to the low hum that would not stop. There was something watching from the dark edge of the field, not a being in the shape of a body, but a presence like a pause between heartbeats. Maggie thought she heard it make a sound, a single small note of something like a bell struck underwater. When she turned, the note dissolved into the wind. The men worked faster. By dawn, the press had been fed its version of the truth. Orders went out to create all material and move it away. Photographs were taken and misfiled with practiced hands. A plane left with cargo that smelled faintly of ozone and memory. It would be years, decades. Some said, before people put all the small facts side by side and found themselves unable to reconcile them. There would be testimony, there would be denials. There would be books that told you what to think and others that made you feel the hair at the back of your neck stand up. But inside Maggie's jacket was something nobody had counted on. A shard that hummed like a sleeping thing. When she pressed it to her palm, the color inside the metal rolled like a tide. It felt like a story trying to begin. She walked home with the plane folding behind her and the town still half asleep. As she passed the old diner, the neon sign blinked a tired eye. The radio in the corner of the kitchen was playing a slow, sweet melody that sounded like a half-remembered lullaby. Maggie poured herself a cup of coffee she did not drink and sat by the window. The shard lay in her palm, warm and alive. Outside, the sky was whole and brilliant with stars. Inside, somebody somewhere had started to stitch new rules into the night. The world would choose a version of events that fit a comfortable shape. But every now and then the shard would sing under her fingers, and the song would reach into the corners of her memory and tug. It sang of places beyond maps, of hands that never touched but left impressions, of a truth that did not insist on being believed. And then, in the thin hours before the town woke for the day, Maggie heard an unmistakable sound, the radio upstairs. An old set that always played static between programs clicked, and for the briefest moment a voice came through, clear and small, like someone from a very long way off saying one simple word that made the coffee tremble in its cup. Listen. The desert does not often keep secrets. By day it is all open ground and horizon, a flat honesty that leaves no place to hide. But at night, when the wind slips low and the sagebrush folds its fragrance into the cool air, the desert becomes a stage for shadows. Shapes grow strange. The stars seem closer than they should be. And sometimes, in the stillness, the sky itself forgets its silence. On the night of July 2nd, 1947, Roswell was sleeping. The town was small then, a scatter of houses and a main street stitched together with neon diners, a drugstore, and the occasional jukebox hum. Dogs slept by the back porches, screen doors clicked softly in the breeze, and radios whispered the last dance songs of the night. It should have been uneventful, a night that slid unnoticed into the next day. But the sky disagreed. A light appeared, first like a lone star that moved quickly, then brightened, then swelled into something no star had ever dared to be. The first to notice was a rancher's boy, awake past his bedtime, tracing constellations against the window glass. He saw it cut across the heavens, silent, purposeful, a wound of white fire against the black. He thought it was an angel falling sideways. By morning, he wouldn't know what to call it. Far across the plain, Maggie Ortega had just finished logging the night's weather reports at the radio station. Her desk lamp was dim, the air thick with the faint crackle of static and the smell of warm dust. She rubbed her eyes, stood, and stepped outside to clear her head. That was when she saw the sky split, not in thunder, not in storm, but in a slow, majestic unfurling of light. It was not falling. It was writhing. The object cut a smooth, impossible curve through the firmament. Its glow shimmered without smoke, no tail of fire, no sound of tearing. For one breathless moment, the desert was bathed in a pale brilliance that turned every rock and cactus into sculpture. Then came the impact, not a roar, but a muffled thud, as though the earth itself had exhaled and caught the thing softly. The horizon glowed for a heartbeat, then went dark again. Silence returned, but it was not the same silence. The desert had swallowed something it did not understand. By dawn, the town stirred with whispers. At the barber shop, men spoke of a flash seen beyond the mesa. At the diner, waitresses traded rumors of thunder without rain. The rancher, William Mac Brazel, found his sheep restless that morning, circling near the fence line. When he followed them out, he discovered the field littered with strange debris, long strips of silver like foil that refused to crease, rods that bent and straightened with a will of their own, beams inscribed with violet symbols he could not read. Brazel bent down, lifted one piece, and tried to crush it in his fist. It slipped back to its original shape, perfect and unmarked. He dropped it quickly, as if it had bitten him. The wind moved through the grass with a low, uncanny hush, as though even it was unwilling to disturb what lay scattered there. That afternoon, Brazel drove into town to tell the sheriff. He was not a man given to dramatics, and he used plain words, but his eyes betrayed unease. Sheriff Wilcox listened, his lined face impassive, then picked up the phone and made a call he would not later admit to making. Before dusk, uniformed men from the Roswell Army Airfield were at Brazel's ranch, rolling trucks across the dirt, setting up cordons, and speaking in clipped, authoritative tones. Neighbors who tried to wander near were turned away with firm hands and firmer warnings. The debris was gathered, piece by piece, loaded into crates, and covered with tarps. Yet rumors escaped, as rumors always do. A boy who had followed his father out to the hills swore he saw men lifting not just fragments, but something larger, something hidden under canvas, carried with a reverence that suggested it was more than metal. Back in town, Maggie listened at her desk as the military radio traffic thickened with codes and urgency. She heard words not meant for her: secure the site, transfer immediately, deny all civilian access. Her pen hovered over her notebook, tracing fragments she only half understood. She knew better than to repeat them, but still, she wrote them down. That evening, the Roswell Daily Record published a headline that startled every diner counter and porch swing. RAAF captures flying disc on ranch in Roswell region. The words were clear, bold, impossible to ignore. For one brief, luminous moment, the town of Roswell became the center of the universe. Men crowded into the paper's office, demanding details. Women whispered over iced tea, eyes wide. Children ran through the streets holding imaginary saucers in the air. But just as quickly, the story was retracted. The following day, the Army issued a news statement. The debris, they said, was nothing more than a weather balloon. Simple, ordinary, unremarkable. Reporters were told to let it drop. Civilians were encouraged to forget what they'd read. Only, people don't forget so easily. Mac Brazel found himself escorted, questioned, and discouraged from further talk. The sheriff stopped answering questions. Maggie noticed certain logbooks from that night quietly removed from the radio station's shelves. And still, the memory of the sky tearing open remained, sharp as glass in the minds of those who had seen it. That night, unable to sleep, Maggie drove past the ranch roads, her tires crunching softly over gravel. She parked beneath a wide, star-hung sky. For a long time she sat in silence, the desert stretching vast and unknowable around her. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled something from her jacket pocket. It was a sliver of that strange metal, one she had slipped into her pocket before the soldiers had noticed. Under the moonlight, it shimmered with shifting hues, bending colors no human eye should hold. When she pressed her palm against it, she felt the faintest vibration, like the heartbeat of something asleep. Her breath caught. In that moment she understood. Whatever had fallen here was not finished. The story was not over. The desert was only the beginning. And in the stillness of the night, from the edge of the plain, she thought she heard a sound, a faint, distant hum, almost like a voice carried on the wind, speaking in a language her bones almost recognized. The shard did not feel like any metal Maggie had ever held. Not steel, not tin, not copper or iron. It was lighter than paper, yet firm as stone. Smooth to the touch, but never cold. Most unsettling of all was how it seemed alive. How it pulsed faintly when she held it too long, as though remembering her warmth, answering it with something of its own. For 3 nights she kept it hidden, tucked away in a small cloth pouch inside the drawer of her bedside table. But each night it called to her, not with sound, no voice, no music, but with a steady insistence in her mind. When the house was quiet, when the desert winds had stilled, she felt a tug, like the pull of a half-forgotten dream urging her to finish it. On the 4th night, she gave in. Maggie cleared the kitchen table and set the shard down under the light. Its surface flickered like moonlit water. She touched it with a fingertip and gasped. The color bloomed outward, rippling like a drop of ink in milk, shifting from silver to violet to a deep indigo that seemed bottomless. It was not just color, but memory. The instant her skin made contact, her mind flooded with an image so clear it startled her. A sky she had never seen before. A horizon where 3 suns burned pale gold. Shapes like wings, not birds, not machines, gliding silently above a sea that shone as if lit from within. She jerked her hand back. The vision collapsed, leaving only the shard, dim and still, lying on the table. Her pulse thudded in her throat. She whispered aloud, as if asking the empty room, "What are you?" The military, meanwhile, had been busy weaving its own answer. Trucks rumbled in and out of the base, carrying covered crates. The local paper, once bold in its headline, now spoke only of balloons and radar reflectors. Men in uniform knocked on doors, politely reminding townsfolk that they must have misunderstood what they saw. Mac Brazel disappeared for days, returning with a hollow look, refusing to say much at all. But silence breeds suspicion, and in Roswell, whispers travel faster than trains. At the diner, farmers muttered about strange convoys leaving the base at odd hours. Children passed rumors of little men seen near the crash site. And behind it all, the desert itself held a charged hush, as though listening. Maggie didn't join in the gossip. She carried her secret quietly, as one carries a lit candle through a dark house. Each night she experimented. She tapped the shard gently against the table. It bent, folded in half like cloth, then unbent without a trace. She tried burning it with a match. The flame slipped across it, leaving not a mark. Once, she dropped it into a glass of water, and the liquid quivered around it, refusing to touch, as though repelled. But the visions were what frightened her most. Every time her skin lingered against the metal, she saw fragments. A vast city carved into stone cliffs, spires glowing faintly blue. A desert not unlike her own, but with skies streaked by colors that had no names. And faces, not clear, not human, but watching her with quiet intensity, as though they were the ones peering into her world instead of the other way around. Each vision ended the same way, with a sensation, not an image. The unmistakable feeling of falling. One night, as she held the shard, Maggie heard a knock at her door. She froze. The kitchen clock ticked softly. The knock came again, firmer this time. She slipped the shard back into its pouch and tucked it into her pocket before opening the door. A man stood there, silhouetted against the porch light. His uniform was pressed, his hat pulled low. She recognized him instantly, the same officer she'd seen at the crash site, the one who had warned her away, Miss Ortega, he said quietly. May I come in? Every instinct told her to refuse, but something in his tone was not command but weariness. The sound of a man carrying more than orders. She stepped aside. He removed his hat as he entered, glancing round the modest kitchen as though cataloging it. You've seen something you weren't meant to, he said finally, and I suspect you've kept a piece of it. Maggie's breath caught. She said nothing. The shard in her pocket pulsed, as if aware of the conversation. The man set his hat on the table, folded his hands. I'm not here to arrest you. If anything, I envy you. You touched it, didn't you? Her eyes flicked to his, startled. How would you know? He hesitated, then reached into his own coat pocket. Slowly, carefully, he placed something on the table. Another shard, smaller than hers, but unmistakably the same, gleaming, weightless, impossible. Maggie's pulse hammered. You kept one too. He nodded, a shadow of a smile crossing his face. Orders said destroy everything. But tell me, Miss Ortega, how do you destroy something that refuses to be broken? The two shards, lying close together on the table, began to hum. Softly at first, then stronger, until the sound resonated in the wood beneath them. The air thickened, tingling with static. Maggie felt her hair lift slightly as though in a storm's charge. The officer leaned closer. Voice hushed. Every time I touch mine, I see things. Places I can't explain. People who aren't people. I thought I was losing my mind. But you've seen it too, haven't you? Maggie nodded, slowly. The relief in his eyes was almost painful. For a moment, neither spoke. The kitchen was filled with that low, thrumming chord, as if the two pieces of alien metal were recognizing each other after being apart. Then, without warning, the shards lifted, only an inch, only for a heartbeat, but they floated above the table, spinning lazily, emitting a glow like trapped starlight. Maggie gasped. The officer swore under his breath. And then, just as suddenly, they dropped back, clinking softly against the wood. The hum ceased. Silence returned. Maggie stared at the shards, her voice trembling. They remember each other. The officer leaned back, his face pale. Or, they remember something else. The pounding on the door rattled the frame. Military police, open up. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs. The officer, she still didn't know his name, leaned close, his voice urgent but low. Stay calm. Don't let them search. They're not here for you. They're here for it. Her hand brushed against her pocket, feeling the shards hum grow stronger, almost protective. She swallowed hard, nodded, and opened the door. 3 men in pressed khaki uniforms stood on the porch, their boots crunching the gravel. Their faces were shadowed beneath caps, eyes sharp with authority. Behind them, a military truck idled softly, its headlights spilling across the yard. Miss Ortega, the tallest of them, said, not asking but stating, We've received reports of unusual activity in this house. His gaze flicked past her, scanning the kitchen where the officer sat stiffly, head on the table. The soldier's voice cooled. And I see you already have company. The officer rose smoothly, saluting. Evening, Sergeant. I was just questioning Miss Ortega. Per orders. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. Orders whose? For a beat, silence stretched, taut as wire. Maggie felt the air itself hesitate. Then the officer spoke again, steady but vague. From command. Need to know basis. The soldiers exchanged glances. Their posture shifted, not retreating but no longer pressing. One of them stepped forward, holding a clipboard. Regardless, we'll need to search the premises. Maggie's stomach tightened. The shard pulsed in her pocket, warm against her thigh, as if sensing the danger. She forced her voice to remain level. Is that really necessary? It's the middle of the night. What could you possibly expect to find here? The sergeant's eyes locked on hers, cold and assessing. That depends on what you've been hiding. The search was methodical. Boots scuffed across the wooden floors, hands opened drawers. Eyes peered beneath beds and into cupboards. Maggie stood by the kitchen door, arms crossed, trying to look more irritated than terrified. The officer remained close, his face carved into neutrality. When a soldier reached for the bedside table, the drawer where she had first hidden the shard, Maggie's pulse spiked. But the drawer was empty now, only a Bible and a few old letters inside. The shard was safe in her pocket, pressed tight to her palm. Finally, the sergeant returned. Lips thin. Nothing here, he muttered to his men. Then to Maggie, if you do come across anything unusual, you'll report it immediately. For your own safety. Maggie forced a brittle smile. Of course. The soldiers filed out, boots striking the porch with hollow thuds. The truck's engine roared back to life, its red taillights shrinking into the desert road until the silence returned. Maggie exhaled shakily. Her knees trembled, but she stayed standing. The officer leaned against the wall, rubbing his face. That was close. Too close. She rounded on him, whispering fiercely. You brought them here, didn't you? They were following you? He didn't deny it. Instead, he met her gaze with a grim honesty. They're watching all of us. Anyone who was near the wreck, anyone who touched the debris. They're trying to erase the truth before it spreads. And you? She asked. Whose side are you on? His silence was long, thoughtful. Finally, he said, I'm on the side of what's real. Whatever fell here, it wasn't ours. I can't just lock it away and pretend. Morning came pale and restless. Roswell woke to find more military convoys rolling through its streets. More whispers of closed-off fields. More neighbors who suddenly stopped talking about what they'd seen. The newspaper had gone silent, repeating the weather balloon story like a mantra at the diner. Men muttered into their coffee cups about soldiers confiscating cameras. At the barber shop, women whispered about lights still seen at night out by the ranch. Children played at flying saucers with bottle caps while their parents hushed them, eyes darting toward the windows. The whole town was awake, but it was as though they were sleepwalking through someone else's dream. Maggie, meanwhile, could not stop thinking about the shard. She carried it with her everywhere, hidden but never out of reach. Each time her fingers brushed it, the hum returned, soft and steady, like a heartbeat not her own. Sometimes she swore she could hear faint echoes. Not words, not quite, but tones that tugged at the edges of understanding. That evening, the officer returned, this time without uniform, dressed instead in a plain jacket. He introduced himself at last. Captain Elias Granger, he said simply. Maggie shook his hand, studying him. You're risking a lot, coming here again. So are you, keeping that thing, he replied. Eyes flicking to her pocket dot, she placed the shard on the table. He placed his beside it. Again, the hum rose, filling the air like a note struck on a distant bell. Granger's voice dropped. I think they're pieces of something bigger. Something alive. Maggie tilted her head. Alive, he nodded. Not alive like us, but alive in the way a sea carries memory of a tree. These shards, they remember what they were, where they came from, maybe even where they're supposed to go. Maggie touched the shard, letting it pulse against her palm. And if we put them all back together? Granger's eyes darkened. That's what command fears most. They don't want it reassembled. They don't want to know what it would do. They want it buried. Silence fell. Outside, the dawn broke slow and heavy, painting the desert gold. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. But both of them knew peace was fragile, an illusion stretched thin, because somewhere out there, beyond the fences and the guarded warehouses, more pieces waited. That night, Maggie woke suddenly, heart racing. A sound filled her room, faint but unmistakable. The shards on her bedside table were humming again, louder than before. She sat up, eyes wide. The hum grew into a steady vibration, rattling the glass of water by her bed. And then she saw it. The shards were shifting, inching closer together. Drawn by some invisible force, Maggie reached out, trying to separate them. But the moment her fingers touched the metal, she was pulled under, into a vision. So vivid she cried out. She stood on barren ground beneath a violet sky. A massive craft hovered overhead, its surface gleaming with the same impossible hues as the shards. From its underbelly poured streams of light, not harsh but soft, enfolding the ground in radiance. And within that light, she felt presence, not hostile, not cruel, but vast and incomprehensible. A mind so large it filled the air itself. We were not meant to fall here. The presence seemed to murmur. Help us remember. The vision broke. Maggie gasped, clutching the shards as though they were alive in her hands. The knock wasn't polite this time. It was a fist, hard and urgent, rattling Maggie's front door until the glass panes shivered. Open up! By order of the United States Army. Maggie pressed her back to the wall, clutching the shards in her trembling hands. They vibrated like caged birds, warm against her palms, humming louder with each strike on the door. She glanced toward Captain Elias Granger. He was already at the window, peering through the curtains, jaw set. They brought more men this time, he whispered. They're not here to search, they're here to take. Maggie's breath came shallow. Then what do we do? Granger looked at the shards, then back at her. We don't let them have those. The door splintered under the next blow. Maggie and Granger slipped through the back, their footsteps muffled in the dessert dust. Behind them, soldiers poured inside the house, shouting, overturning chairs, drawers, everything. Maggie bit down on her fear as they fled into the night. They drove until dawn, heading west into emptier land where the mesas cut sharp shadows across the horizon. At last, Granger pulled the car into a dry gully, hidden from the road. The two sat in silence, watching the rising sun bleed pale orange over the dessert floor. Maggie still held the shards, which had grown quiet again, as though resting after their urgency. Finally, she whispered, "They'll take everything, won't they?" Granger nodded grimly. "Every photograph, every note, every witness statement. They'll burn it all. They'll leave nothing behind but a story people can laugh at." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. From it, he unfolded 3 black and white photographs. The images were grainy, but Maggie's breath caught when she saw them. The first showed fragments of metal, spread across the desert ground. The second captured soldiers loading a large, tarp-covered object into the back of a truck. The third, a blurred, hurried, showed something stranger, a pale, rounded shape, half buried in debris, like the curve of a head not meant to be seen. Maggie's hand trembled as she touched the photograph. "Where did you get these?" "I shouldn't have them," Granger admitted. "A field photographer was ordered to destroy the negatives. He slipped me copies before the fire. He's gone now, reassigned," they said. Maggie studied the images. The truth frozen in silver nitrate. "If the world saw these, they'd vanish," Granger interrupted. "Just like he did. Just like the photographs will if we're caught." By midday, word reached them in fragments. They stopped at a roadside diner, keeping their heads down as voices buzzed around them. Said the sheriff's office was cleared out. Files missing. The paper ran a correction. Nothing but weather balloons, again and again. Mac Brazel, poor fool. He won't even talk anymore. Says he misremembered the whole thing. Maggie listened, bile rising in her throat. The truth was being scrubbed clean, not just from paper, but from the very people who had lived it. She leaned close to Granger, whispering. They were writing the story in real time. Soon no one will even believe themselves. He nodded, his face grim. That's the point. They're not just erasing evidence. They're erasing memory. Maggie thought of the visions in the shards, places too vivid to dismiss, voices too real to deny. She touched the metal in her pocket, feeling its faint hum. Memory, she thought. That's exactly what they are. Fragments of something that refuses to be forgotten. That evening, they found shelter in an abandoned adobe house on the edge of a dry arroyo. Dust lay thick on the floor, cobwebs in the corners, but the roof held. Maggie lit a kerosene lamp, its flame throwing soft shadows across the crumbling walls. Granger spread the photographs out on the table. Maggie set the shards beside them. The shards responded instantly, glowing faintly, humming in resonance with the captured images. As though recognizing themselves in the photographs, Maggie leaned forward, her voice hushed. "Do you hear that? They know. They remember." The glow brightened, spilling over the photographs. For an instant, the blurred images sharpened. The tarp pulled back in the picture, revealing hints of shapes the camera hadn't quite caught. Symbols etched into curved metal, lines of light like veins. The photograph pulsed, alive under the shard's glow. Granger drew in a sharp breath. "My God, they're restoring what was lost." Maggie touched one of the photographs. The shard hummed louder, and for a moment, she was pulled back into a vision. men in uniforms snapping photographs, flashbulbs popping. A commander barking orders. Crates nailed shut in haste. And above them all, the desert sky watching, vast and unblinking. She gasped, pulling her hand away. The photograph dimmed, returning to its grainy stillness. They're not just metal, she whispered. They're memory. They're telling us what really happened. Granger's eyes burned with something fierce. Hope, maybe. Then we need to protect them. If these shards can preserve the truth, maybe one day they'll force it back into the light. But outside, headlights swept across the arroyo. Maggie and Granger both froze. A convoy had arrived, trucks, jeeps. Soldiers moving with practiced silence. The house was surrounded before either could speak. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker, cold and commanding. Captain Granger. Miss Ortega, step outside immediately. Hands visible. Do not resist. The shards hummed again, harder now, rattling the table. The photographs fluttered as though in a wind. The kerosene lamp flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. Granger's jaw clenched. They can't get these. He reached for the shards, but Maggie held them tight, her eyes wide. No. She whispered. They're not just pieces of metal. They're trying to tell us something. If we give them up now, the story dies with them. Granger's gaze locked with hers, grim but resolute. Then we run, and we make sure the truth lives. The door shuddered as the soldiers rammed it. Dust shook from the rafters. The lamp tipped, glass shattering. The shards flared in Maggie's hands, brighter than the lamp had ever been, casting the room in violet light. The hum deepened into a tone that resonated through their bones. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to pause. And then the door burst open. The room was frozen in violet light. Dust hung suspended in the air, motes gleaming like tiny stars. The soldiers who had stormed the door faltered, rifles trembling in their hands. The shards in Maggie's palms pulsed brighter, and with each pulse came a sound. At first it was only a hum, low and steady, but then it stretched, reshaped, the way a violin's note bends under a careful hand. The hum became a voice. Not a human voice, not exactly. It was layered, like echoes folded into one another, words threading through Maggie's mind rather than her ears. She gasped and staggered back, but the shards clung to her palms like living fire. You are the witness, the voice whispered, resonant and soft. Do not let them bury us. Maggie's knees nearly buckled. She clutched the shards tighter, pressing them to her chest. Granger steadied her, his face pale but fierce. What is it saying? She shook her head, breathless. It knows me. It says I'm supposed to. Remember, the soldiers finally moved. Their captain barked an order, seize the evidence. Disarm them? They surged forward, but the moment their boots crossed into the violet light, their rifles jerked upward as if pulled by invisible hands. Metal clanged against the ceiling beams. The men cried out, scrambling backward as their weapons spun in the air like toy tops. Clattering to the floor useless, Maggie's heartbeat thundered. The shards' light dimmed, just slightly, as if conserving themselves. The soldiers retreated, faces pale, muttering of witchcraft. Their captain cursed under his breath, signaling them to regroup outside. In the sudden hush, Maggie's breath shuddered. She whispered to Granger, "It protected us." Granger nodded slowly. "No, it protected you." They fled again before the soldiers could rally. Through the back of the adobe house, across the arroyo, their footsteps muffled in sand. Above them, the desert sky spread wide, a vault of stars blinking in silent witness. They didn't stop until they reached a rocky ridge. From there, they watched headlights sweep through the abandoned house. Shadows of men spilling through every doorway, but none dared follow them into the wilderness. Maggie collapsed against a boulder, still clutching the shards. They had dimmed again, humming low, as though drained by the effort of defending her. Granger crouched beside her, catching his breath. What did it mean, when it spoke to you? She closed her eyes, trying to steady her pulse. It said, "I'm the witness. Then I have to keep them from being buried." Them? Them, she repeated, her voice shaking. Not it, them. That night, they hid in a cave carved by centuries of wind. Granger built a small fire from mesquite branches, their smoke trailing up through cracks in the rock. The flickering light softened the cave walls, making them look like painted canvases. Alive with shifting shadows, Maggie laid the shards before her on a blanket. They pulsed faintly, as though waiting. She took a deep breath and whispered, "If you can hear me, show me." The shards warmed beneath her hands. Light spread across the stone wall, painting images like a lantern slide projector. At first, the desert, vast and silent, just as she knew it. Then a streak of fire tearing through the night sky, brighter than any comet. The fireball broke apart, fragments scattering like falling stars. One piece plummeted toward the desert floor. Maggie gasped as the vision shifted. A craft, smooth and silver, spiraling as it fell. Inside, shadows moved, beings, thin and luminous, with faces both alien and strangely human. Their eyes glowed with sorrow, not fear. Then, the crash. Sand and earth erupting, the craft half buried in smoke. Soldiers arriving, floodlights glaring. Orders shouted, crates sealed. And finally, the silence of cover-up. The vision faded, the cave walls returning to stone. Maggie wiped tears from her cheeks. They weren't monsters. They were alive. They suffered. Granger's jaw clenched as he stared at her. And the army will never let that story be told. Maggie's hand shook as she gathered the shards. Their hum was softer now, almost lullaby-like, as though mourning. She whispered to Granger, "If they wanted me to see this, then maybe I'm supposed to tell it." Granger studied her, his eyes shadowed by firelight. "You'd be hunted, branded a liar. Maybe worse." Maggie closed her eyes. "Then maybe that's the price of truth." The fire popped, casting sparks into the air. Somewhere outside, coyotes howled under the cold stars. In the deepest hours of night, Maggie stirred awake. The shards glowed faintly beside her, whispering at the edges of her thoughts. Not words this time, music. It was a melody, soft and haunting, weaving like threads through her dreams. She rose and pressed her hand to the shards. The voice returned, tender, almost pleading, "Remember us. Carry us. You are the witness." And then, an image so clear it stole her breath. A place, not on earth, not entirely. Towers of light rising from a pale sea, stars brighter than she had ever seen. Beings walking in harmony, their forms radiant, peaceful. A world untouched by war or silence. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the shards to her chest and whispered, "I'll remember." But when she looked up, she saw Granger watching her from across the fire, his eyes grim. "Be careful, Maggie," he said softly. "The more they give you, the more dangerous this becomes. The army isn't our only problem. If others find out what you carry, they'll stop at nothing." Maggie clutched the shards tighter. For the first time, she wasn't sure if he was warning her about soldiers or something else entirely. The desert night was a vast ocean of silence. Stars glimmered like cold lanterns, scattered across the black sea of sky. Inside the cave, the fire had died down to embers, yet Maggie couldn't sleep. The shards, warm against her chest, whispered faintly in her mind. Restless, like children murmuring in their sleep, she kept replaying the moment before dawn. That figure in the violet glow, tall, watching, silent. She had blinked, and it was gone. But the shards had sung louder, as if greeting something she couldn't yet understand now. Every time she closed her eyes, she felt it still out there, watching, waiting. By morning, Granger was already awake, staring out at the desert with binoculars. His jaw was tight, lips pressed in a hard line. "They're still moving," he said, without turning. "Convoys, jeeps, sweeping every arroyo and ridge." But he lowered the binoculars, frowning. "It's not just them." Maggie shifted uneasily. "What do you mean?" Granger pointed to faint impressions in the sand outside the cave. They weren't boot prints, nor animal tracks. They were long, smooth impressions, as if something had glided over the earth. Brushing the sand aside, "They circle us," Granger muttered. "But I never hear them, never see them. Only the signs they leave behind." Maggie's pulse quickened. She thought of the luminous eyes beyond the firelight. "It's them," she whispered. "Not the soldiers. The others." Granger gave her a sharp look. "And what do they want?" Maggie touched the shards, feeling their low hum. I don't think they want to hurt us. I think they're making sure I don't forget. They left the cave by midday, climbing over sun-baked ridges and cutting through dry washes where the mesquite grew thick. The desert stretched in all directions, alive with heat mirages. Maggie carried the shards wrapped in cloth, their warmth seeping through, steady as a heartbeat. At dusk, they reached a lonely stretch of highway. The road shimmered in the dying light, empty but for the occasional tumbleweed rolling like a lost traveler. They followed the road until they spotted an old gas station, its pumps rusted, its sign leaning crooked, its windows clouded with dust. Inside, the shelves were bare, but a back room offered shade and a place to rest. Maggie collapsed on a crate, weary but grateful. Granger checked the perimeter, his revolver always close at hand. For a moment, the world seemed still, and then the radio crackled. It sat on a shelf in the corner. A boxy old shortwave, its dials corroded. No electricity powered it, no batteries lay inside. Yet it hissed to life, static spilling like breath through cracked speakers. Maggie froze. The shards in her lap pulsed once, answering. Then, through the static, a voice emerged. Not the layered, echoing voice she had heard before. This was clearer, softer. It trembled with weariness, yet carried a dignity that pierced the silence. Witness. They will silence you. Do not let them. We are near. Maggie's heart pounded. She whispered, "Who are you?" The radio whined, the static thickening, then cleared for one final phrase. Not lost, waiting. The dial snapped to silence. Granger's face had gone pale. He stared at the shards, then at Maggie. You realize what that means, don't you? They're not just memories. Some of them might still be alive. Maggie clutched the shards tighter, her breath trembling. Then maybe that's what they've been trying to tell me all along. They didn't linger at the station. By nightfall, they were back on foot, moving along dry creek beds to avoid the headlights sweeping the horizon. The air grew colder, the moon rising silver above the mesas, but the silence weighed heavier now. Even the coyotes had gone quiet. The desert felt watched. Maggie stumbled, pausing to catch her breath. That was when she noticed it, a shape on the ridge above them, tall, motionless, framed in moonlight. Her voice broke in a whisper. Granger. He followed her gaze, hand going to his revolver. But when he blinked, the figure was gone. Sand slid down the slope, as if something had moved, but no footprints remained. Only the smooth, gliding impression she had seen before. They're hurting us, Granger muttered. Guiding, or trapping. The shards pulsed in her hands, steady, insistent. Maggie's voice trembled, but carried conviction. No, they're leading us somewhere. Hours later, they reached a canyon carved deep into the desert floor. The air there was cooler, shadows stretching long under the moon. The shards hummed louder, vibrating against Maggie's chest. We're close, she whispered. Granger eyed the canyon warily. Close to what? Before she could answer, a low rumble echoed through the stone walls. Lights glimmered at the far end, not the harsh beams of jeeps, but soft, unearthly glows. Pale and shifting like liquid silver, Maggie's breath caught. Them, Granger gripped her arm. Maggie, think. If they're alive, why show themselves to you? Why not anyone else? She stared down at the shards, which pulsed brighter than ever, spilling violet light over her fingers. Her voice was soft, certain, because I'm the witness. Cliffhanger end of part 6. From the canyon's depths, the silver lights rose higher, moving like lanterns carried by unseen hands. The air vibrated with a low, resonant hum, the same melody the shards had sung in her dreams. And then, through the glow, a figure stepped forward. Tall, thin, eyes radiant as starlight. Not a vision, not a dream. Something, someone, had survived. The canyon glowed. Silver light bathed the stone walls, soft and shimmering, as though the stars themselves had descended into the earth. Maggie's breath hitched as the figure stepped forward from that glow, tall, slender, its skin pale and luminous like moonlit glass. Its eyes, vast and radiant, fixed on her with a sorrow so deep it seemed older than time. Granger stiffened beside her, hand on his revolver, though even he seemed reluctant to raise it. The figure moved without sound, every step smooth as drifting smoke. The shards in Maggie's hands pulsed wildly, their hum rising into a note so pure it made her chest ache. And then, like a door opening inside her mind, she heard the voice again. Witness. You carry our memory, but you must carry more. Maggie's knees weakened. She whispered aloud, more? The figure extended a long, delicate hand. The light brightened, silver spilling across the canyon floor. Behind it, more figures emerged from the glow. 4 to 6, a dozen. Survivors. Granger's breath hissed between his teeth. My God, they're real. After all this time, one of the beings stepped closer. Its eyes were endless pools of light, yet gentle, tender. Maggie felt no fear as its hand hovered above hers, not quite touching. The shards lifted from her palms, rising into the air like petals caught in a breeze. The fragments swirled around the being, snapping together in brief flashes, a curve of shining hull. The suggestion of a symbol etched into metal. The faint hum of power, before breaking apart again, unfinished. Maggie understood instantly. You want me to complete it, to remember it whole. The voice thrummed through her bones. Yes, what they bury, you must lift. What they erase, you must keep alive. Our vessel fell, but our memory cannot. The shards glowed fiercely, then drifted back into her hands, hot as living fire. Maggie turned to Granger, her voice breaking. This is why they chose me, not just to see, to carry it. Granger's jaw clenched. He looked from her to the beings, then up at the stars overhead. Maggie, if you tell this story, they'll come for you. They'll strip you of everything. They'll paint you a lunatic. I know. She cradled the shards to her chest, the weight of them heavier than before. But if I don't, they'll vanish forever. The canyon air vibrated with a low hum, a resonance that filled the space like music. The beings stood silently, their gaze steady, as though entrusting her with their very existence. And then, the spell broke. A harsh light swept across the canyon rim. Floodlights, engines growled in the distance. The Army. Granger swore under his breath. They tracked us. Voices barked orders above, and the clatter of boots echoed on the ridge. The silver glow faltered, shrinking back like a tide retreating from shore. Maggie panicked. No, don't go. The nearest being leaned close, its voice a whisper only she could hear. We are never gone. When they silence you, remember, we wait beneath the stars. Then, like smoke scattering in the wind, the beings dissolved into light, fading back into the canyon depths. The glow vanished, leaving only the shards blazing violet in her hands. Granger grabbed her arm. We need to move now. They scrambled through the canyon, shadows chasing them as soldiers poured down from the rim. Spotlights cut across the stone, rifles gleaming. Bullets cracked against rock. Maggie clutched the shards as she ran, their hum guiding her through the dark. She felt no fear of being shot, only fear of losing what she carried. At last, they slipped into a narrow fissure and pressed against the stone as soldiers thundered past. The echoes of pursuit faded into the distance. In the silence, Maggie trembled, clutching the shards to her chest. Granger exhaled raggedly, his back against the wall. You saw them, she whispered. You saw them with me. Granger nodded slowly. I saw enough to know the world isn't ready for this. Maggie's eyes burned with tears. Then we make it ready. They never returned to Roswell. By dawn, they were miles away, the desert stretching endless before them. The Army would keep chasing, would keep burying the truth beneath headlines and denials. But Maggie carried more than memory now. She carried witness. She carried survival. She carried them. And as she looked up at the pale morning sky, she whispered to the shards, I'll tell your story, no matter what it costs me. The shards pulsed once, soft and steady, as though an answer, epilogue soft, dreamlike ending for narration. Years later, long after the newspapers stopped mocking, after the Army filed away its reports into locked drawers, after most of Roswell had forgotten, Maggie Ortega still told her story. She told it in whispers. To those who would listen, she wrote it in journals she buried in safe places. She carried the shards wherever she went, their hum steady, eternal. Most people laughed. Some called her mad. But a few, only a few, saw the light in her eyes when she spoke and believed. And when the desert nights grew clear, when the stars shone bright and cold. Maggie would step outside, clutch the shards to her chest, and listen, for in the silence, just beneath the vast breadth of the sky, she still heard them, waiting, watching, beneath the stars.